Okay, hello, my name's Rosie, and for today's Whitworth Advent project I'm going to be talking you through a simple bookbinding technique and how to make a junk journal. Before we get started on any of the actual bookbinding, I just wanted to talk a bit about what a junk journal is, as well as giving some examples of items that at the time of filming this are currently on display in the gallery that I personally think act as really good examples of ways that you could use your junk journal. So, what is a junk journal? A junk journal is generally defined as a book or journal that is made by an individual using mostly recycled or found materials. I find junk journals really interesting because you can use materials that are already in your house to create something that is really unique to you. I also find it really interesting to see what particular colours or images or text or textures people like to include in their junk journal. I think it's really interesting to see how people's individual likes and dislikes and expressions get incorporated into these pieces. This is the junk journal that I have made in this video. I just wanted to hold it up at the start of this so that you can see where we are headed. It's relatively small, it doesn't have that many pages, and we are going to be using a type of stitch called a saddle stitch to bind our pages together. Okay, what is a zine? A zine is usually a self-made or self-published booklet or publication, very similar to a junk journal, but these tend to be produced in small batches and are often used by artists or activists to help share their work or practice or spread awareness for certain topics. I'm gonna credit all of the artists and put any relevant links in the text below this video on the blog post, so please make sure that you follow up on those links and those names if you are interested in any of these pieces. I just wanted to open them up and talk a little bit about the individual aspects of them that I find really interesting that might kind of jog your inspiration when you're making your own book. The first zine that I wanted to pull up is called Chopped, and it is a food zine that raises money for gender affirming care. The page that I really wanted to highlight was this one by Camille Halimi. I hope I'm pronouncing that name okay. But what I really liked about this page is the fact that it has a really cut and stick feel to it. It feels very handmade, even though it is definitely photocopied or scanned and then reprinted, so none of the actual texture is on this page. It makes the content of the book feel very accessible. And at the time of filming this zine is also available to purchase in the Whitworth shop. The next zine that I've got here is produced by the Men's Room, who are a charity that help empower disadvantaged young men, trans and non-binary people. This zine is called The Queer Times, and it has a really beautiful, again, kind of cut and stick collage style. You can also see from the way that it's structured, this zine is actually made out of one single piece of paper. It's quite common for a lot of zines to be made in this way, as it negates the necessity to actually bind pages together like we're going to do today. Another example of a folding zine that was created in tandem with the Undefining Queer exhibition is this little Undefining Queer pocket glossary. Now, this piece is very text heavy. This zine is just absolutely chock full of definitions, and it's a really cool way to help spread awareness of certain terms and a really good companion to the Undefining Queer exhibition. One last zine that I've got here is a zine by Rosalie Schweiker, which was part of our Economics the Blockbuster exhibition that went on over summer in partnership with Manchester International Festival. Rosalie's zine is a little bit different from the others because it was specifically commissioned by the gallery in order to question the ways that the gallery uses its collection in the present and how collections have come to be historically. All that aside though, I think that this zine does still do a really good job of feeling very personal and accessible. An example page that I really love is this page that details a collection of Rosalie's things. She uses this to like lead into talking about the difference between personal collections and gallery or museum collections, but these drawings feel, again, very homely. They feel very accessible to interpret, and they're of everyday household objects and items which the viewer or reader would be able to recognise and relate to. I think I now want to go into you will need. So, the next question is really, what will we need to make our junk journal? Now, I have got a list of items here that I used, and I bought these as part of a relatively cheap bookbinding kit. You can find them very easily online. I will also mention when I'm listing these if there are any sort of household alternatives to these specialist tools, but there are some that I will highlight as definite must-haves if you're wanting to make a book and bookbind specifically. So one of the items that we've got on our list is a metal ruler. Specifically, you want a metal ruler because a plastic or wooden one might get damaged when you use a knife to clean up the edges of your pages. We also have a whole handful of bulldog clips. These will be used to help clamp all of your pages in place for binding as well as cutting. We've also got a good old-fashioned pair of scissors, a craft knife. Next we've got some needles. I don't believe that these are bookbinding needles specifically, but you will be needing a needle that is quite sturdy, as you're going to be puncturing quite a lot of paper with it. A small thin needle is quite likely to bend or break when going through that much paper. Just make sure it's a nice strong one. We've also got some bookbinding thread. Now, this is one of the items that I will highlight as needing to specifically be bookbinding material. But the difference between bookbinding thread and regular old thread that you might use to sew or stitch is that bookbinding thread is actually coated in a film of wax. This helps prevent the thread from fraying. Most people who will have used a needle and thread before will have had the frustration of trying to thread your needle and the end of your thread fraying and not going through the hole correctly. The wax coating on bookbinding thread helps with that. It helps keep the strands and fibres of the thread together, but it also strengthens the thread and allows it to be able to really securely hold all your pages in place. This item is a bone folder. The reason that this paper folder is made out of bone specifically is that it is much less likely to cause tears or damage the paper when you use it to smooth out edges and folds. Of course, you can use any household item to help fold creases in paper, but take care not to damage your paper when you're using other items. You will also need an awl, that is A-W-L, not A-L-L. This is essentially just a giant pointy metal stick. We'll be using this to help puncture holes in your pages to help guide the needle and thread through when we are stitching and binding our pages together. You can replace this with items such as drawing pins or like corkboard pins. Just be careful of your fingers because obviously there is a lot less control when holding such a tiny object that doesn't have a nice big handle. And last but not least, since we are making a junk journal and they are made from found or recycled or scrap materials, you will need paper. Lots and lots of scrap paper. I personally like paper that has got a combination of text and images and different colours, but if you wanted to make yourself, for example, a sketchbook or a notebook that you wanted your pages to be relatively plain in so that you are able to write down or draw out ideas, that is perfectly fine. Use some plain paper, use some lined paper, use some graph paper, whatever floats your boat. Specifically for this junk journal, we're going to be using a lot of different colours and textures and materials because I personally like the way that they look and find them very visually interesting. And it's also just a really, really cool way to recycle a bunch of old magazines, or in this case, a combination of magazines and exhibition catalogues and old sketchbook pages. So yeah, those are all the materials that you're going to need to bind your book.